everyone, welcome. We'll get started at the top of the hour. Hello, and welcome to Walk Audit 2.0, Walkability Assessment Next Steps. Let's go ahead and get started. A little bit about the Safe Routes to School National Partnership. We are a nonprofit organization that works to advance safe walking and bicycling to and from schools and to improve the health and well-being of kids of all races, income levels, and abilities, and to foster the creation of healthy communities for everyone. What we do. We improve quality of life for kids, families, and communities. We advance policy change at the federal, state, regional, and local levels. We catalyze support for safe, healthy, active communities, and we share our deep expertise. A little bit of webinar housekeeping. To the left is the GoToWebinar viewer through which you'll see the presentation. To the right is the GoToWebinar control panel where you can raise your hand, ask questions, and select the audio mode you'll use. Please note, your control panel will collapse automatically when not in use. To keep it open, you can click the View menu and uncheck Auto Hide Control Panel. Two options for listening to us today. You can use your telephone or you can use your computer microphone and speakers. If you have sound problems with one selection, go ahead and try the other option. We'll do our best to field any issues. Just send us a message. Even though you're muted, we want to hear your input. Use the questions box to ask speakers questions for the Q&A portion of the webinar. We'll try to answer if there's time at the end. After viewing today's presentation, you might want to view it again or send the link to some of your friends. If that's the case, you can do it for free by going to our website, saferoutespartnership.org. Clicking on the Resource tab heading and clicking on the webinars in the list on the left-hand side of the page. All past webinars are stored here for your viewing pleasure, and they are a really great resource. Today's speakers include Bandana Shrestha, Director of Community Engagement, AARP Oregon, Lauren Henricksen, Community Health Specialist, Clark County, Washington, Becky Gilliam, Pacific Northwest Regional Policy Manager at the Safe Routes to School National Partnership, and my name is Hannah Williams. I'm the Program Services Manager with the Safe Routes to School National Partnership. Today's webinar will be focused on Walk Audit Next Steps. We'll have some wonderful speakers today that'll be sharing their work. I'm going to get things started by reviewing a few free Walk Audit resources we have available through the partnership. The first first resource is our Walk Audit Toolkit. This toolkit has all the background information you'll need to know and useful templates and links for planning a route or knowing what to look for, understanding who should help with a walk audit, and sharing observations to make change. The toolkit is available on our website. You can use that link listed there. Our second resource is a fact sheet on walk audit next steps. In the next few slides, I'll be outlining the topics included in this fact sheet. Walk audits really are a great tool to engage community members and gather information for community planning and traffic safety projects. But a walk audit is really just the first step. Today, we're going to focus on how to use the results of your walk audit to make your street safer and more comfortable for folks walking and biking. When thinking about what to do next with your walk audit observations, start by remembering why you decided to conduct a walk audit in the first place. What was your goal? Next steps will vary depending on what your goal was. Some goals to consider could be capturing and sharing information, highlighting a specific need, contributing to a larger improvement process. You'll be seeing different methods for sharing walk audit findings from our presenters today. In our Walk Audit Next Steps fact sheet, we highlight the following methods. Share your report and conclusions with agency staff. Include city or county transportation, planning, public works, or anyone else you can think of. Ask questions. Ask them what would be most helpful to support their work. Try presenting your findings at a city council, county board, or planning or transportation commission meeting. Approach the staff to see if you can get a dedicated time on the meeting agenda to present your walk audit process and findings. And if you're not able to get a designated time, you can provide brief information during the public comment portion of the agenda. You could always try writing up and sharing findings with the broader community. Why not write an article or an op-ed for the local newspaper and post your findings from your walk audit on social media or perhaps a blog post. There are a number of actions you can take right now to support improved walkability. How about organizing a community cleanup? Work with residents and local businesses to address some of the maintenance problems seen on your walk audit. Organize a community event to promote walking and physical activity. This could be a walk to school day event or a family bike night, or perhaps a reoccurring activity like a walking group. Fundraise. Check with your local planning or public works staff about policies around community fundraising and donations. Teach others to conduct walk audits and keep up the momentum. Share the tools and resources you used with other community members and encourage them to organize walk audits around their school and their neighborhood. The Walk Audit Next Steps fact sheet will be available on our website this month. Now let's go ahead and move into the speaker portion of the webinar and learn from Safe Routes to School practitioners in the Pacific Northwest about how they've used their walk audit findings to advance walking and biking in their communities. Our next speaker is Becky Gilliam. Becky serves as the Pacific Northwest Regional Policy Manager, working to strengthen the regional network in the Pacific Northwest with a particular focus in Salem-Keizer and Central Lane areas. In this role, she works to increase funding and improve policies that result in improved infrastructure and programs to support safe walking and bicycling for children and families, with focused work and technical assistance in lower income communities.
Thank you so much, Hannah, for the introduction, and I want to thank you all for joining us for today's webinar. I'm really happy to be speaking with you all today and looking forward to the discussion later on. As Hannah mentioned, my name is Becky Gilliam. I work for the National Partnership as a Regional Policy Manager, working mostly in the Salem and Keizer region, as well as Central Lane County in Oregon. Today I'm going to be talking with you a little bit about some recent work that I've been supporting in the city of Keizer. So just a little bit about Keizer. It's located in Marion County, just north of Oregon's capital city, Salem. The population in Keizer is around 40,000. Schools within Keizer are part of the Salem-Keizer School District, which is the second largest in the state. I began working in Keizer earlier this year when the city expressed some interest in applying for a new statewide grant opportunity. The Traffic Safety Bikeways Pedestrian Committee at Keizer was leading the charge in identifying some potential projects for this new Oregon Department of Transportation grant. Going forward, I'm just going to refer to this Traffic Safety Bikeways Pedestrian Committee as TBP and Oregon Department of Transportation, ODOT. So again, this is a new grant program. It's the Safe Routes to School Infrastructure Grant Program, which came about as part of the larger transportation package that was passed by Oregon State in 2017. This is a new source of funding to address infrastructure barriers for students walking and bicycling to school. There's $10 million available annually, which is going to increase to $15 million in 2023. Just quickly, some eligibility criteria so you know a little more about what this grant program looks like. The safety projects that communities will be applying for must be on a public road right-of-way. They need to be consistent with jurisdictional plans, supported by the school or school districts the project is affecting, and the projects need to occur within a 1 mile radius of a Title I school. So that means 40% or more are low-income students. Again, this is a new program, so while rules were still being finalized earlier this year, the call for proposals and the exact program details weren't available until July of this year. And shortly after, October 15th, was the deadline to apply for this grant program. So again, I started having conversations with the Keizer TBP committee as they were looking to identify projects of interest. We were able to identify the top 2 schools of interest for the community. That's Cummings Elementary and Kennedy Elementary Schools. Both are Title I. Cummings had long been on the radar of the Public Works Department and on their running to-do list of bigger infrastructure projects. Kennedy was the other school identified by the TBP committee as another project of interest. With this ODOT grant opportunity, communities could apply for multiple projects. So I encourage the city to explore applying for improvements for both schools. I asked the committee if there'd be any interest in doing a walk audit and attended their formal meetings and also met with members offline. I got a lot of interest and they said, yes, let's do it. And how do we do it? We went ahead and met with the school principal and parent group at Kennedy Elementary School. Hannah mentioned earlier our toolkit from the National Partnership, which is what I use to build our walk audit format. Based on the conversations with committee members and Kennedy Elementary School staff and parents, that's how we decided on the route. So you'll see on the right of your screen my sort of basic Google Maps that I created for our walking group. And I want to pause here to mention that I had never been on or organized a walk audit before. So I really encourage anybody listening to this webinar today to consider doing one even if you haven't before. It was a lot easier than I thought it would be, especially working alongside the city and the community. We had a really great turnout for our walk audit. Lots of diverse input, great questions and feedback from all of our participants, which included staff and leaders from the City of Keizer Public Works and TBP committee members. We had parents and students join us from Kennedy Elementary School. We had our aging community represented through staff and volunteers at AARP and Center 50 Plus, which is a community center for aging adults in the Salem and Keizer region. We also had a member from our local walking group, and also our transit district was represented during our walk audit. One challenge during our walk audit was that with such a short grant timeline, we were doing our walk audit during the summertime, so we couldn't observe student behavior or traffic behavior during arrival or dismissal times. But this is where we could really lean on the expertise of our parents and students who joined us and hear about their experience walking and bicycling the routes throughout the school year. So again, we were relying on the National Partnerships Toolkit. We were completing the surveys and having really active discussions throughout the walk. We also had time afterwards to sit down and huddle up and kind of review our observations and finalize our notes as a group. Following the walk audit, I volunteered to pull together, compile, and summarize the group's discussion and observations, which became our kind of concrete data that I was able to turn over to the City of Kaiser, which they used in applying for the ODOT grant. I also shared the summarization that I prepared to the entire group. I think it's really important to keep the walk audit participants informed and make sure that they're included throughout the whole process. The City of Kaiser also did a walk audit for Cummings Elementary, the other school that I mentioned. It's really great that they found this to be such a helpful tool during their grant application process. After I turned over the data from our walk audit, the city staff used that information to directly inform which projects they would be applying for making infrastructure improvements. You'll see on the left of your screen a screenshot of part of our walk audit summary that I prepared, and notice 2 heavy check marks. I put those there to show you that you'll see on the right of your screen the actual application Kaiser submitted. And these were 2 streets that were identified as eligible projects for this specific ODOT application, and were added into the application for adding and repairing sidewalks around Kennedy Elementary School. I also want to mention that part of the project selection was really based on the narrative that we received from the parents, some of whom are volunteers as crossing guards throughout the school year. And they really were able to point us to which street students are using the most during arrival and dismissal times. And they also kind of pointed out dangerous traffic behavior, speeding cars, and that was really helpful in informing which streets should be prioritized for this grant application. The City of Kaiser submitted this application as well as one for improvements to the other elementary school, Cummings. We should know in the next couple of months if either of the projects are selected to receive funding. So while I wish today that I could share that exciting news, we are still eagerly waiting to hear how the applications are going to be scored. I want to share with you all some key takeaways from this walk audit experience and the grant application process as well. I had the chance recently to debrief with the city staff and leaders that I worked with throughout this process, and wanted to share some of their feedback and also some of my own thoughts. One of the first takeaways relates to shared knowledge and observation. The walk audit itself was a really great opportunity to educate community members on engineering rules and traffic laws. I was talking to the Public Works Director, and he mentioned that during the walk audit, he was able to have a discussion with parents and community members, noting that every intersection in Oregon is a crosswalk, and lots of walkers and bicyclists didn't know that were on our walk audit with us. On the flip side, the community also shared some really important observations that Public Works hadn't noticed before. For example, the Public Works Director mentioned that he's drove up and down the same street for 30 years and never noticed a really important disconnect in a sidewalk that is really challenging for parents and students who are walking to and from school. So we saw a really valuable information being shared between the city and community, and that's not always an easy opportunity to come by. Second takeaway I wanted to share relates to community building. So going along with that open exchange, This process really strengthened the relationship between the community and city staff and leaders. Planners and engineers were, as well as community members, were really able to realize the mutual benefit for kids, aging adults, and other populations. We had a really great active discussion around how Safe Routes to School isn't just for kids. And this grant opportunity was a really great example of that. Public Works said to me that they're going to be definitely thinking more about shared use and mutual benefit in future projects. Also, we saw that this walk audit really strengthened our grant application. In talking with staff and leaders who prepared the application, they agreed that the walk audit observations really directly informed both proposals for both elementary schools. They said that the diverse input that they received from community members, aging population, transit, really strengthened both applications. So let's talk about a few challenges that came up during this process. I've already mentioned it, but want to touch on it again, that this was a time-sensitive grant. So it was a little more difficult to organize a walk audit, especially since I hadn't done one before. Have the time to analyze the data afterwards and get feedback and follow-up questions from folks that participated. And then, of course, completing our applications on time, which they did. Also want to mention shifting priorities. The city had already received historical input from community and leaders of high interest projects. There's a running list of these big projects that need to be tackled, and it comes down to a funding issue and how do you prioritize those. After walking through the options with this ODOT grant, we were able to expand and shift our priorities to include that additional school. Another challenge I wanted to touch on is community engagement and input. So while I've been really harping on how wonderful that was during the walk audit, the follow through was a bit of a challenge. So I mentioned I handed over the summary to the full group that participated, but we didn't go over the grant applications with walk audit participants. And in talking with staff and leaders who put together those applications, we agreed that's something we might want to do differently in the future to make sure that everybody that participated is kind of there from start to finish. Going forward, Public Works has said that they're really inspired to reuse the walk audit model for future projects. They said they definitely do it again and that they'd like even more community and neighborhood participation in the future. I want to mention also that a walk audit can be goal-oriented, as with this one, with a specific grant in mind, but you may be surprised what you find. Several observations were made that didn't qualify for this grant specifically, but we now have that data that can be revisited in the future as different funding opportunities arise. I want to close by saying that community members found this process really approachable. They found their leaders and city engineers more approachable. It's my hope and belief that community members who participated in the walk audit in Kaiser will now feel more confident in approaching and working with the city on these types of issues in the future. With that, I'm going to hand it back to Hannah and look forward to more questions and discussion later. Thank you.
Thank you, Becky. Thanks for sharing those takeaways in Kaiser. I'd like to introduce our next speaker. Bandana Shrestha is the Director of Community Engagement for AARP Oregon and leads AARP's livability work in the state, including growing and supporting the network of age-friendly communities, advocating for policies and programs that enhance affordable and accessible housing options, and expanding transportation and mobility options for all. Before joining AARP, Bandana served as Director of Model Programs and Partnerships for the Points of Light Foundation, where she developed and led programs to engage and serve diverse, underserved populations, including the Family Strengthening and Neighborhood Transformation Campaign and the Asset Building and Economic Security Initiative. Bandana spent her early career in Nepal working on empowerment-based sustainability development programs. She has a BA from Linfield College and an MFA from University of Oregon. She serves on the boards of Asian Pacific Islander Network of Oregon and 211 Info.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here. Unfortunately, I have sort of a laryngitis situation going here, so my voice is not so sexy and deep usually. So, but hopefully I'll be able to at least not totally fade away in talking about how we at AARP have engaged and used walk audits in our work. So as you mentioned, Hannah, my name is Bandana. I'm the Director for Community Engagement here at AARP Oregon. And for those of you who may not know, AARP is a membership organization of people 50 plus. We have about 38 million members nationwide, and here in Oregon, where I'm at, we have 500,000 members. And our goals are to, enhance quality of life for people as we age, and that includes everybody. Though our members are people 50 plus, we fight for and equip each member and individual in the community to live their best lives, and we work on policies and issues that impact people throughout their life course. Certainly, livable communities is one of those issues, and an important one at that. I want to start out by giving you more background. I think I have more slides on background than on actually how we have used walk audits and walk audit information that we have garnered. So bear with me while I go through some of these with you. And hopefully I know how to advance this. There we go. So here you'll see how our conversation today fits into our work around age-friendly and livable communities. This is an important part of AARP's work, where we are really looking at how communities support people as they want to age in place and want to continue to thrive in their communities as long as they are alive. We know from our research, for instance, that people, 80% of people 45 plus say they want to remain in their own home and community as they age. They want to be able to get around without a car. They want to be able to cross the street, ride a bike, all that good stuff that we all hope for throughout our life course. But unfortunately, that's not always possible. And transportation is one of those major barriers that comes up, and especially walkability, pedestrian safety is an issue that we hear from our members and people 50 plus often. So here you'll see a definition of what an age-friendly community is. It's an inclusive, accessible environment that promotes active aging, which emphasizes enablement rather than disablement, and is friendly for people of all ages and abilities. Just in terms of background, to go over this really quickly, one of the things that AARP has found through our work over the years on this issue is that mobility obviously is very important for older adults to continue to thrive in their communities, but people do rely largely on cars and private motorized vehicles for transportation. And for those people who don't use their vehicles, 3/4 of their trips are actually, walking trips. And for people who are doing more, using different types of modes, are doing better off, both in terms of health outcomes, in terms of their engagement in community. And if you don't drive, as you grow older, you're likely to be more isolated. You're likely to not be able to do a lot of fundamental things that you enjoy doing throughout your life course, whether it's going to restaurants and enjoying family gatherings or going to doctors even. So, and walking remains that fundamental mode of transportation, which is, even if you're not able to drive, you should be able to continue to do that. And here's a slide that kind of goes over that, is that how, as we grow older, we are often outlive driving. So walking, there are going to be a lot more non-drivers as we grow older and our communities get older. I don't think I mentioned before, but our communities are getting older. Right now, there are people, 1 in 8 people are people 65 plus in our communities throughout the United States. Some communities are, of course, ahead of the curve, like if you're looking at Florida or even in Southern Oregon. But in just a few years, within the decade, we'll be looking at people, 20% or more of our population being people 50 plus. And that means walking and importance of alternative transportation is really important. So we come with that with that background in mind. And some of the other research, both from AARP, but from Smart Growth, and even here in Oregon from Oregon Walks, tells us that pedestrian safety is a major issue for people 50 plus. Oregon Walks report shows state of pedestrian safety in Oregon showed that people 65 plus are likely to die 4 times more, likely to die 4 times, likely to be killed while walking 4 times more likely than the people any other age. So for us here in Oregon, AARP, we were really motivated and to really address the issue of pedestrian safety when we saw that report. So we undertook a number of activities related to that, and also really looking at the idea that, you know, walkability and walking is an issue for people of all ages and abilities. So to really address this idea of expanding mobility options and expanding pedestrian safety and walkability, these are the kind of the key issues that we're focusing on about promoting livable design, promoting walking, active transportation, advocating for safe street policies, funding, educating, influencing decision makers, and educating and mobilizing our own members as well as the general public. And in this work, walk audits have been an important tool. Just like Safe Routes to School National Partnership, AARP also has a wonderful tool that's available online. It's a walk audit toolkit that has both the assessment guide, but also guide for leaders. So, you know, if you want to check it out, you'll see that link right there. We have used this tool both in a sort of a more informally as well as more expansively, and not just here in Oregon, but around the state. Actually, a lot of our other state offices around the country have used walk audits to really advance a lot of those things that I mentioned, including advocated for safe streets policies and complete streets policies, or to make specific changes, like for instance, just advocating for putting in crosswalks or better signage on streets so that driver behavior is, you know, better, because that's one of the key issues in terms of older adults, you know, just being able to cross the street and feel safe if drivers are not following the posted signs for speed, or if there's not adequate signage in terms of speed. So I want to just tell you briefly about 3 examples of how we've used walk audits and how we've used walk audit information that we've garnered in our work over the last few years. Excuse me for a minute here. One example is from a couple of years ago, where we did a walk audit in city of Roseburg, which is in southern, sort of mid-southern Oregon. This was right after the state of pedestrian safety report had come out from Oregon Walks, but also at the same time, city of Roseburg was embarking on its transportation safety plan, and we were contacted by a local advocate who was very interested in promoting biking and walking to come to Roseburg along with Oregon Walks to do an audit. And in that instance, just like Becky before me discussed, you know, in terms of really identifying the route to thinking about who to invite, were all done in partnership with the local host, as well as AARP and Oregon Walks. And when our primary goal was to really, in this instance, was not so much to really focus on the report we would create or to focus on one particular project, but to really set the stage for a process that the city was going through to bring together not only the advocates and our members and the general public, but also key leaders in the community, of course, including people like the city manager, folks from the Department of Transportation, but also nonprofit leaders and other thought leaders in the community who would be thinking about walkability and safety as this process was um, uh, unfurled, I guess, in the community. And so there were a lot of good thinking going in terms of who we would invite, what route we would choose, and then how we would facilitate a conversation um, after the immediate walk audit that was conducted. And part of it was really trying to showcase how walkability and pedestrian safety was of shared interest. So while AARP was there, we were focused on, how older adults experience walking and getting around on foot in that stretch of route that we had chosen. We also chose the route to be close to, for instance, a high school. It was also an area where there was a lot of, there was a off ramp coming off of I-5. So there was a lot of opportunity to experientially help people see how pedestrians of all ages would experience the road, the stretch of road. So also providing some great fodder for the planners, the advocates who were going to be engaging in the transportation systems plan development, which was being updated at the time. So that's one example that I want to share with you. And it was very discreet where we were on the ground, and the work was continued by the advocates and of course the city folks who were involved in developing the plan. The other one I want to tell you about is related to one we have recently been involved with, and actually Becky has also been involved with, is with the City of Salem. City of Salem became an age-friendly community just a year ago, and they've been involved in a age-friendly assessment project for the whole entire year. One of the focus, of course, is transportation, as transportation is one of the domains of making a community age-friendly. And part of that has been conducting walk audits, and this hasn't been done in a more organized fashion like the one that Becky talked about or the one that we did in Roseburg, but more about providing the tools to the volunteers who in groups have been going out in the community and doing assessments throughout the city of Salem. And they have been using a modified, more simplified version of the AARP walk audit tool, but they have also looked at what Becky had created for the city of Salem, Kaiser walk audits that she's been doing, and this modified, shorter walk audit tool. We did a training for the volunteers, and they signed up for these walk audits, and these groups of volunteers have gone and done audits throughout the city. And the Center 50 Plus, who is leading this charge, is compiling this report both as individual audit reports, but also collectively they're going to inform the age-friendly assessment report that Center 50 Plus is putting together as part of the age-friendly Salem assessment that they are required to do, and it'll inform the action plan that the city will be putting together to make their city more age-friendly. And it will, it'll bring issues of how, because they have chosen audit routes, to do audits in different parts of the city, which will highlight key issues like that are especially important for older adults, like for instance, access to parks, access to other services, getting around their own neighborhoods, and those kind of things. And that's going to be presented to the City Council as part of the age-friendly report that Center 50 Plus is going to be presenting. So that's my quick few minutes. Thank you for your patience. I'm just putting here a bunch of resources from AARP. You'll see that there's the walk audit toolkit that's available. You can also go and look at the AARP Livability Index, which is right there, which does give you a score when you go and enter, whether it's your city or your actual street address, gives you a score for transportation, including score for walking and what kind of policy options there may be. So with that, I'm going to end right here, and I'll wait for us to discuss more later. Thank you.
Thank you, Bandana, and thank you for all of those resources. I'd like to introduce our next speaker. Lauren Hendrickson is a community health specialist with Clark County Public Health in Vancouver, Washington. She has worked for Clark and Cowlitz counties in a public health and chronic disease prevention for the last 3 years. Lauren has over 10 years of experience in building community partnerships and facilitating broad-based public health and capacity building initiatives. She lives in the small community of Kelso, Washington, with her 5-year-old twins and partner.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity to be with you today. I'm going to dive right in about a walking audit process we did up in Kelso in preparation for a Safe Routes to School grant application 2 years ago in 2016. If I can get this to advance here. Sorry about that. Kelso, Washington is located about 45 minutes north of Portland, Oregon. And the particular neighborhood we were working in is called South Kelso, and Wallace Elementary School is the elementary school that serves those kids in South Kelso. We pulled together a planning team in preparation for our Safe Routes to School grant proposal, and that team was comprised of the Kelso School District Transportation Manager, a City of Kelso planner, and an engineer, the school counselor from Wallace Elementary, myself in public health. We had a law enforcement member, and most importantly, we had 2 community health advocates. If you don't know what community health advocates or some are called community health workers are, these are community members who are residents of the communities they serve, and they are very well connected and help to serve their community by connecting them to health or other social services. In our case, they also did a lot of programming and special events in the South Kelso neighborhood. Wallace Elementary School is 91% free and reduced lunch, and it's a heavily walking and biking school. So 353 kids live within a mile of the school, and 200 plus kids are walking to and from school every day in this neighborhood. And at the same time, South Kelso was built basically on a swamp. They're kind of right next to one of the rivers in our community, and as a result have a lot of drainage issues and other kind of special infrastructure challenges that have made the network of bike and pedestrian facilities less than desirable. So you can see in some of these pictures, like the water and the puddles that are on the sidewalks and in the boulevard. There's not a lot of curb and gutter, so cars would just like drive right up onto the sidewalk, blocking pedestrian routes a lot of times. And there are also a lot of issues around like safe crossings and lighting and things like that. So our process for putting our proposal together for Safe Routes to School started in February when we convened the planning group I talked about earlier. Our community health advocates held a couple of different special events at the school where they surveyed parents and students about their concerns around biking and walking to school and some of their priorities. And we had those in English and Spanish. And then on the public health side, we did some kind of data collection for the proposal and for the city on using data from the school districts. In March, we did our walking audit, and that was a partnership between the community health advocate team and myself. And in April, the city of Kelso kind of took over on the project engineering and scope, and they really led the grant writing and submission process. We also did some bicycle and pedestrian counts in April. which helped kind of fill in those numbers for us about how many kids were using those arterials. So our process for the walking audit specifically was that the community health advocates did a lot of outreach to try and get participants in the walking audit. They did some outreach to the PTO at the school. We put some announcements in school newsletters and used kind of their own connections in the community to recruit. We ended up with parents, some community members. We had some students along, and then we had a couple of engineers from the city who came on the walking audit as well. We did have some parents with very young children who brought a stroller, which was helpful, and we had a couple people who had mobility issues as well who were along with us, which I think were great perspectives to add to the group. And then the community health advocates chose a route for our walking audit that would give us as many opportunities as possible to see as many of those routes that we knew kids were walking every day. We use the walkability checklist. This tool is everywhere, so it's easy to find if you just get on Google. It is on the toolkit that Hannah mentioned at the start of the webinar as well, so it's linked from there, I noticed. But this was a great tool for us. It has literal check boxes where you can evaluate your neighborhood for everything from safe crossings and lighting, ramps and ADA accessibility to, the sidewalk conditions and how safe you feel and that kind of stuff. And our goal in doing our walking audit was to identify the project priorities for potential safe routes to school projects. So we wanted to use this to identify what would go in the proposal to the Safe Routes to School grant program. And we took the results of those parent and student surveys, as well as all the feedback we got on those walkability checklists and the notes from the folks who participated in the audit, and we compiled those into a one-page summary document. And I know this is hard to read. It's pretty specific to the actual neighborhood, so it's not totally applicable to folks who aren't familiar with Kelso anyways, but basically we just highlighted the community's priorities that we found based on all of those tools, and we took this document to the planning team and shared this input with the city who was spearheading our application. And there were a couple projects or a couple corridors that emerged pretty easily as the highest priorities from the community. And so after our discussion with the city, we all agreed to put improvements to the Laurel Street corridor as our proposed project for Safe Routes to School. And that was for a number of reasons. One, because there were no existing sidewalks there. There were huge problems with like puddles and mud and drainage and cars blocking access. This is a route that's directly adjacent to the school. There were more than 60 kids walking or biking that route every day, and they were actually getting pushed out onto the street because the sidewalk was so unwalkable. So the city kind of agreed that that was the priority, put the project scope together and submitted the application. And later that year, we found out we were awarded the Safe Routes to School funding, and the project was just completed over this past summer. So we have kind of been through the whole cycle, and we communicated that back with the community as well. So just a couple of kind of lessons or observations from the process that we went through. We found the walking audit to be incredibly helpful in kind of helping us figure out how to engage the community, how do we think about what the most equitable project proposal might be, how do we even prioritize like all of the issues that we're seeing in our community and put something compelling together for a grant application. I think an unintended happy consequence of the walking audit was that it was really reciprocal. I think we went into it with the idea that this would be a way for the community to insert itself into the city's process of writing and submitting this grant. And in actuality, it was really a two-way kind of trust building exercise. So it was really great for the residents and the community members on the walk to hear from the engineer as well, because I think there was a lot of historical mistrust and hesitation about the city. People felt ignored, like we have all of these infrastructure problems that don't get fixed and they don't seem to be prioritized from the city. And to be able to hear from an engineer about why that is and some of the barriers that they're facing in this neighborhood in particular to address those issues was really helpful, and I think went a long way to helping people understand that it wasn't just neglect. And then finally, feedback after the walking audit is really important. I think we didn't do this very well. We could have done it a lot better. So make sure that you plan for how you're going to communicate what you did with that feedback back to the community. So we had a lot of turnover at the city in our community health advocate team as well. So the city wasn't perfect at letting us know when they had received the funding and what it was for and when it would be implemented. So we really had to kind of track that down and then figure out, go back to the principal and make sure that that message was getting out, which we did eventually, but we should have planned for it more upfront and kind of been prepared to celebrate a little bit better, because it's a big deal and it's really great to have this in place. And it was largely because of the walking audit and all of the input we got that I think this proposal was successful. So plan to make sure that you involve community from start to all the way to the finish of what you're doing. That is all I have, and I'm looking forward to answering questions and continuing the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren. Okay, we have time for some questions and answers. So if you haven't put your questions into the question box yet, go ahead and do so. I'm going to read these in the order that they were submitted. I have a question here for any tips on how to identify Title I schools.
Hi, this is Kari Schlosshauer. I'm the Senior Policy Manager here in the Northwest. I can answer that question, at least for Oregon and Washington. And so for those of you who aren't familiar with what a Title I school is, it's essentially a school with a large concentration of low-income students. And that school, usually to be eligible, it would be about 40% of the school students would be eligible for a free and reduced lunch, and then they would receive supplemental funds from the federal government. In Washington, the best place to look for that information is at the Office of the Superintendent of Public Instruction, OSPI. They have a website and you can find information there. Also, usually most school districts will list the list of schools that do receive Title I funding as well. In Oregon, you can look on the Oregon Department of Education's website, but you can also look on the Oregon Department of Transportation's website. When they did have their Safe Routes to School grant funding open, they created a pretty cool map of where the Title I schools are that would help applicants to make sure that they were selecting a school that was appropriate for a project that they were submitting. And I'll put the link to that map into the chat box.
Thank you, Kari. I have a question here. Do any of our speakers have any experience or thoughts about using technology in place of sheets of paper and clipboards for walk audits? I know there are a few dedicated walking audit apps that are available. Has anybody used that or have any thoughts about that?
this is Bandana. We have partnered with, in the past, Oregon State University, where they used a map geotag cameras, and it was sort of like people would choose routes on their own. The way we had done it was also an age-friendly assessment where volunteers were assigned these cameras that are available, and they would be geotagged, so they would choose a route as to how their daily activities would be done, where would it would be more photographs, and that report would be shared with people. So that was one particular thing where there was a particular type of camera, the equipment we had available. But I know that some of our other partners have done photo voice, which is obviously not the same thing as an audit, but that's at least the experience we have.
Thanks, Bandana. I have some questions about how to engage folks during a walk audit. A lot of the pictures that were shown, they're big groups. So are there any best practices or tips for how to keep everyone engaged?
This is Becky. That was a really interesting and fun part of the walk audit during the actual walk itself. We did it in the summertime, so it was a little bit warm, and so every time after a couple minutes of walking along a sidewalk, I'd ask the group to kind of pull to the side and find some shade, and that gave us a really good opportunity to get out of the sun, but also ask some questions and refer back to the toolkit throughout our walk audit, and asking those questions out loud and asking if anybody has noticed anything related to a specific category. I relied really heavily on the walk audit toolkit itself, and then kind of co-led with our public works director, who was asking a lot of really great questions and getting a narrative from the folks involved on the walk audit.
Yeah, and I would echo that. I would say just build in lots of stops along the way. Don't plan to go very far or very fast, and we did a lot of like little huddles. We probably had 12 people on our walking audit, so it wasn't a huge group, and it was enough that you could kind of huddle on a corner to regroup and have a conversation.
I think one thing I would add is that how you set up the walk in the beginning. Usually when we have done audits, we have a meeting in the beginning where there is some training and presentation and opportunity for people to introduce themselves and talk about why they're there. So a little bit of icebreaker type of activities early on really helps to connect people with each other, so they understand who's at the audit. And in addition to having these stops during that time, as we are participating and going on the walk, if they've already known who's around the table, they can connect with those folks. So that really helps as well.
Thank you. Okay, I have time for one more question. In our community, it took 8 years to put in one crosswalk and sidewalk repairs near one of our elementary schools. This caused our school's PTO to become disillusioned with the process when the kids and parents who are engaged in Safe Routes to School are no longer at the school by the time the infrastructure improvements were made. How do we keep momentum going? Any recommendations for how to keep momentum going when the process takes so long to get the infrastructure improvements implemented?
That is hard. It seems like, part of it might be, and this is just more speculation than actual experience, though we here up in Multnomah County, I remember we weren't involved with that, but it took a long time, similarly, to put a crosswalk in front of a senior center. And but what I saw there was that, the people, the advocates who were involved, really persevered. They met regularly. They talked to the city planners regularly. They set up a lot of meetings with the electeds as well. So I think a fair bit of organizing continued. So I don't know that that's an answer, but you know, a lot of it is, of course, has to do with not having enough resources, but some of it is also really raising the awareness and political commitment. So that's what I have to offer at this time.
Yeah, this is Becky. I think that kind of is the big question, and I've been thinking about that as well as we wait to hear if our grant application will receive funding, but also thinking about what other next steps could we take. I mentioned that we gathered some data that, you know, issues that really couldn't be addressed through this specific grant opportunity, but things like neighbors parking on sidewalks and blocking the sidewalk by, you know, parking too far out in their driveway. I've thought about, you know, is there something we can do to circle back with those folks that participated in the walk audit and do some kind of neighborhood-wide campaign or messaging? But I think that's a really good question and something I'm continuing to ask myself going forward.
I think at least with the Safe Routes to School project we did, having school staff who were invested in this was really helpful because they don't leave typically, and so you can kind of capture some of that momentum through them. And there was Wallace Elementary was redesigned shortly after we submitted our proposal, and I know that like some of the issues that we identified on the walk audit were taken under consideration in the new design. So if you can, you know, piggyback on other projects that come up, I think it helps.
I want to throw out one more idea, and you know, here in Oregon, in Portland, we have Better Blocks PDX. They've been doing great work with temporary demonstrations. So that might be something for us to think about. You know, if cities and communities are not ready to put in permanent infrastructure or make some like permanent things, you know, is there an opportunity to talk to the city and to bring advocates together and do a pop-up to show and demonstrate how things would be better? And I've seen those kind of temporary demonstrations really take hold where public really adopts it, likes it, and then, you know, then the city, in essence, you know, continues to make that more permanent solution. Of course, it'll mean really bringing the resources together, but pop-ups are great and demonstration projects are great. So that might be something to think about.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for joining the webinar. Real quick, just wanted to end with an opportunity, a national opportunity, and then also an opportunity in Oregon for Safe Routes to Park funding. So there is an email down there, parks@saferoutespartnership.org for more information if you're interested in applying. Thank you so much for attending the webinar. We have a quick survey and everything will be available online that you saw today. Thank you so much.